Hello. Socialization will continue. How does it really actually work in our lives? Now that we know what socialization is, the process by which we learn characteristics of our group, how do we become socialized members? Socialization occurs through three ways: through the self, the mind, and emotions. I first want to talk about how do we develop a self. Cooley. Several scholars looked at the role society plays in human development, and several theorists say social observation, contact, and interaction really help us develop who we are. First, I want to talk about Cooley. Cooley's looking glass self. Cooley's looking glass self says that a person's sense of self develops from interactions with others. Now, I'm going to explain this concept, and this concept I want you to understand not only for this course, but for your life. Cooley's looking glass self says, we imagine how we appear to others, we interpret their reactions toward us, and from that we develop a self-concept. If we perceive a person's thoughts as favorable, we will have a positive self-concept. If we perceive a person's thoughts as less favorable, we will develop a negative self-concept. Just briefly stated, how many of us, somebody may have said something to us one day that just kind of made us have a bad day, or somebody said something to us that gave us a compliment. And that whole day, there was nothing that could kind of shake us out of our happiness. Okay, that's how Cooley's looking glass self works. Our self-concept is constantly in a state of flux. And depending upon who we interact with, our social perceptions of those interactions will influence how we behave and believe. I'm going to quickly look up, I'm going to post it online. There's a poem called Children Learn What We Live. Children live what we learn. Children live what we learn. And what that poem really shows is how, depending on how a child grows up, that develops their sense of self-concept. I will post that online for you so that you can kind of read that. I love that poem, but it really kind of sets the stage. I can give you a very real practical example of Cooley's looking glass self and how we not only have to be conscious of or know that we have a choice not to receive other people's negativity, but we also need to be careful about how we treat other people. First, this is the part I want you to know. You have a choice between steps 2 and 3. We imagine how we appear to others. That's step 1. We interpret their reactions toward us. We have a choice in that interpretation not to receive other people's negativity. And that's the part that, even though we're only together for 14, 16 weeks, even afterwards, years later, I'm going to be that little conscious on your shoulder. Don't believe them. Okay? Block out that negativity, because every last one of us does have some level of, whether it's a little purse or whether it's a big trunk full of baggage, based on the negativity that we have allowed or received from other people. Now what I want you to do is Control, Alt, delete all that negativity from your mind and yourself, and we're starting with a clean slate. And don't receive anybody's negativity in the future. An example, I was in a work environment where there was a supervisor that was very mean, demeaning, condescending, and harsh toward her staff. I wasn't working with her or under her, so that was a good thing. One day, it was a Friday afternoon, she had a one-on-one meeting with one particular social worker. That person came out of the meeting, went to her cubicle, and was in tears crying. That next day, that Saturday morning at 10:30 a.m. in the morning, that 23-year-old staff member took her own life. Now, did that person perhaps have other things going on in their life? Sure. But that supervisor, she wasn't fired by, they removed her from that particular program, and, I don't know where she is now, but she has a life sentence, because every day in her mind, she's going to probably think, did I say something or do something that perhaps took this person over the edge? So I warn you to be very careful and conscious about what you say to others, how you treat others, even sometimes what you may consider a joke may really hurt someone's feelings. And think about some misunderstandings you may have had with friends or families, even in light joking. But just understand, their self-concept is actually developing because of their interpretations of sometimes our actions. So just be real careful. But that Cooley's Looking Glass concept, that's a concept to know for life. And your choice is to not receive other people's negativity. Okay, the second concept theory about how we develop a self is through George Mead. He says we learn how to become a self by taking the role of the other. And he said this occurs through 3 stages: imitation, play, and games. Now let's kind of go back in time to when we were a couple of years younger, right? Our math is fine. The first stage, imitation, happens up until the age of 3. And during that time, we can only mimic what we see in the people around us and adults around us. Think about how they say be careful about toddlers and being around kids because they will mimic and say and do what you do. There was something on the news in the last several months about children coming to nursery school and cursing like sailors. Where'd they learn that from? Home. And they interviewed some parents. Oh yeah, they must be, when I'm in the car, this is what they're hearing. Or, oh, it's my husband at home, their father. Okay, so imitation is the first stage. The second stage is play. This is that pretend stage, and this happens between the ages of 3 to 6. Taking on the roles of specific people. It could be a parent. It could be a superhero, Superman, a nurse. Who did you want to be when you were growing up? And you dressed up like them? Wanted to be the firefighter. Think about that. Had all the toys and equipment. Okay. We all like costumes at this stage. Enjoy dressing up in my parents' clothing. Have you ever put on your mom's shoes and your little feet barely fit into the mom's shoes, or tried to put on lipstick? One time I did that when I was little, and my mom and I had matching dresses, and I was painting it and had lipstick all over. Got in trouble, but I was in the play stage. I was developing myself. Yeah, right. I didn't know sociology at that time to get out of that one. Okay, and the last last stage, team games. During team games, think about in our early elementary school. What were some of the games you played at ages 6, 7, and up? In school, you may have had dodgeball, you may have had tag, duck, goose. But during that phase in the team games, we learn what it is to take on multiple roles. And we'll talk about that later in chapter 4. But, at one time you're the tagger, the next time you're the avoider, dodgeball, you're the kicker, you're the catcher, you're the runner. Okay, we learn what it is to take on these multiple roles. That's what George Mead says is how we learn to develop a self. Of course, our self, we are made up of many different roles, and we'll talk about that, as I said, in chapter 4. That's socialization through the self. Socialization through the mind, I said, let's ignore Piaget. When you take psychology class, you'll go further into him, but I want to kind of keep this succinct for you to understand this whole complete concept of socialization. Okay. Sigmund Freud. How many of you have heard of Sigmund Freud? He says that our personality forms from 3 stages. The first is the id. That's our inborn drive for self-gratification. The second phase is the ego, the balancing force between the id and the demands of society. And then we have the superego. That's our conscience. That's the culture that we've internalized, which says this is what I should do. Okay. And that Freud says this id, ego, and superego is a constant tug of war. How does this work? How many of you are morning people? As you see, I did not raise my hand. I'm a night owl. If you notice, sometimes I respond to your emails at 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. But the id, the self-gratification, in that morning when my alarm goes off, the id says, go back to sleep. If I gave into the id, I wouldn't be to class on time. The superego gets me out of bed. It's my conscience, the internalized culture in me says, Dawn, you need to get up, be responsible, go to your job, be there early, so you can, teach class. The ego is like a balance beam. The ego to me is the snooze button on the alarm clock. And I see some of you smiling, shaking your head. I have to set my snooze for It used to be an hour. I've kind of improved to half hour to 15 minutes before I really want to get up. The ego is the balance beam. The ego is saying you can give a little more into the id by sleeping a little longer, but then your super ego is saying you need to get up. Okay, you get up when your second snooze button goes off. Okay, so that's how the socialization of the mind works as far as Freud, as far as personality. The id, the ego, and the superego. It is about self-gratification. Superego is about a culture, what we're told or think we should do, and the ego is the balancing force between the two. And guaranteed, that ego has a very difficult job every day, all day. All right. Now, socialization also occurs through emotions, according to Elkman. He said there are 6 emotions that everyone experiences, and around the world we all display the same facial expressions when we have these emotions. They are anger, fear, surprise, disgust, happiness, and sadness. I feel it's kind of different doing this recording in the first place. I'll have to practice my acting skills a little more before I try to put on those faces. But think about facial expressions for those particular 6 emotions, and you'll find that they are similar around the world. Okay, that is socialization of the self, mind, and emotions. This is Dr. Conley saying I will see you next time. Thank you.